I'm so glad I invented limes because recently there's been a lot of new products on my wish list. Many of them seem to be coming from Werner's collections at Concord and Ninth. I've ordered quite a few, but I resisted a couple as well. Whenever I want something, I try hard to remember to look at what I have already and see if I have stuff I can use to get a similar look. I didn't really intend to use one card as an inspiration, but then I figured that to tell how successful I was at getting the look, it might be good to have a comparison. So I chose this pretty card from Jessica Basher. Let's do a quick limes analysis. Remember, limes equals list, include, modify, exclude, and spin. It's just my little checklist to help you create your own inspired card without directly copying. And it's perfect when you're trying to resist a new release. The colors here are blue, green, purple, and white. The techniques are stenciling and some die cutting. The elements are big, wonky, overlapping flowers with multiple dots for centers and leaves. The stenciled panel is positioned with a point with a purple border over a dotted background, and there's a die-cut hug sentiment with a vellum shadow. Okay, so we know I don't have that Simple Flowers layered stencil set, but I do have this Simon Says Stamp Flower Power stencil that has some big flowers and leaves. They're not wonky, but I think they'll do. And just a side note, while I'm masking off the first big flower, so I won't get ink where I don't want it. I also have the matching dies for the stamps that come with this bundle, and I could have created a separate temporary stencil for each shape with some cardstock. In fact, thinking about it now, that might have been easier than adding all this tape all the time. These shapes are pretty close together, so they'll all fit on the one stencil. I masked not only the edges on the inside of the stencil where the other shapes are, but I also added some tape around the outside edges. A lot of these shapes were pretty close to the edges, so extending them like this will give me extra coverage and protection. Wow, sounds like life insurance, doesn't it? I knew from the start I wasn't going to be using Jessica's colors. I started with Catching Rays, which is from Catherine Pooler, and it's my current favorite bright yellow, and this 5-petal daisy. And I blended the ink through before moving it a couple of times and creating a visual triangle. I started on a half sheet of cardstock. I figure with the size of these flowers, it's going to go pretty quickly, and I may as well get a big panel out of it. I moved on to the more round 5-petal flower, and I used dragon fruit from Concord and Ninth. I'm allowing the flowers to overlap quite a bit, and the translucency of the inks allows the edges of the petals to be visible. I went back to the Catching Rays and the smaller flower to fill things in a bit more. I'm lazy and I didn't want to clean the stencil, but you could have multiple colors for each flower if you wanted. I moved on to the big leaf and I used some Catherine Pooler Lime Ricky. These 3 colors work so well together for summer cards. They're bright and happy and fresh. I filled in even more of the white space with the smaller leaf and the Lime Ricky again. I want to have a bit of white between all the items, but not too much. And hey, that's something important to say about this. Yes, I can get the look of the layered stencil set, but there's definitely more work involved, right? I mean, I have to do all the masking. Well, not if I did the separate stencils. And I have to be the one who figures out how to get a good balance and the right amount of overlap and white space. That's all built right in if you actually have the stencils. And you can argue that my way gives more flexibility, and I guess it does. But with great flexibility comes great responsibility. And I bet you wouldn't notice the difference between my way 5 different times and Kristina's arrangement. So we each have to decide for ourselves what's best. I moved on to the flower centers and I used a big solid dot for the pink flowers, along with the Concord and Ninth Wild Berry ink. I didn't mask these smaller shapes, I just used smaller blending brushes to make it easier for me to color in the lines. Then I used the circle of dots for some of the yellow flowers, and that ties right back into the Simple Flower stencils. Then I decided to add my own little twist by half masking the large leaves and adding a layer of grass skirt. I love how this simple technique gives the look of some dimension, and that's something you could do with Kristina's stencil. You can adapt the shapes with some additional masking if you want. And then finally, to fill in a bit more of the white space, I used the Wild Berry ink and one of the smaller flowers, and I just kind of sprinkled them all over the panel. And that's something else you can do with the original set too. Again, there's nothing saying that you can't stencil your own additional shapes if you want. And then I was finally done. Now you know I love a little shimmer, and I find the easiest way to do that is to use some shimmer spray. This one's from Altenew, and it helps to soften any harshness in your blending or any mistakes, and it also gives the cardstock almost a velvety finish. I trimmed the panel with a square die on that same kind of offset with a point, and I added it to a square white panel. I'm going to leave off the dots in the background, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment instead of die cutting it. I've got this bold thank you from Simon Says stamp that I think works well with the scale of the flowers, and it also has kind of a fun wonky font, so it supports that wonky feeling from the original. Speaking of wonky, I do have some wonky flowers, but they're quite a bit smaller. But I figured I'd give it a go. This is the Pretty Petals layering stencil set from Simon Hurley, and I started with the first layer in that yellow ink. I'm not worried too much about totally even coverage here for two reasons. One, these inks definitely smooth out as they dry, and two, a little bit of variation in flowers will just add some interest. And three, I'm going to add shimmer spray later on. Oh, did I say two reasons? I meant three. I did the flower centers with Tiki torch ink, which is darker than the Catching Rays, but you could just use the same ink again to get more subtle flower centers. And of course, these flower centers aren't dots, so that's another move away from the inspiration. Then I cleaned those two stencils and I shifted them so I could add a layer of dragon fruit flowers and wild berry centers, but overlapping the yellow flowers and filling in some of the white space. So now for the third layer, which is the leaves. The problem is that these leaves are designed to fit perfectly around the flowers, so quite often they're not really full leaf shapes, if you know what I mean. I opted to go back to the first stencil and use the smallest leaf shape and the limericky ink to fill in the areas between the flowers, and again I tried to make sure I had some green kind of spread out evenly and balanced on the panel. I finished this one with the wonky happy birthday from that same sentiment stamp set, and I backed both my white panels onto black panels that were cut with that square that has diagonal stitching on it. It's very subtle, but it gives a really nice finished look to the black mats. Okay, let's compare. My card is smaller than Jessica's, and that's definitely a consideration when you're choosing what you want to use. I think the scale of these big flowers is really fun, but it means you don't get a lot of color mix on my small card. Maybe I need to go up to a 5-inch square card. I could mail them in 5x7 envelopes. I didn't add the solid colored border that Jessica had, and I stamped my sentiment instead of die cutting. But overall, I think I managed to get a very similar look on that stenciled area. My second card, of course, has a completely different scale, so I managed to get more flowers on about the same amount of space. I have wonky flowers with monochrome centers, even though they're not dots. I think it's a pretty good approximation if this is all you have, but it's definitely missing that kind of oversized look that the big flowers have. So you may decide that you do need the exact stencil set after all. I don't think I do. If you're feeling adventurous, you could freehand some big wonky flower stencils. You don't have to use stencils either. This stamp set could be used to create a similar background. There's so many possibilities. Is there something in a new release that you've been resisting? How do you know when it really is time to purchase something new? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. And resisting is definitely a skill I need to keep practicing. Have you seen that new waffle flower quilt release? And Kristina's been showing sneak peeks all week long. Send help! Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.